Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
When Capitol Police Sergeant Aquillino Gonell woke up on the morning of January 6, 2021, he thought it was going to be like any other day on the job. That afternoon, Congress would meet in a joint session to formally count the votes of the Electoral College and announce the winner of the 2020 presidential election. This procedural formality was adopted by the House of Representatives more than 200 years ago and had always been a peaceful non-event in past elections. But on that day, almost 3 years ago, at a rally near the White House, then President Trump called on his followers to march on the Capitol to, quote, take back our country. What ensued would go down in history.
My expectation was that it was going to be peaceful. My expectation was that it was nothing more than anything else that we have faced before. We normally deal with First Amendment right of assembly almost every single day. There's a protest, whether it's big or small, 3 people, 10 people, 15, or thousands of people. And I think on January 6th, we failed to imagine that these people were going to attack us and try to prevent the transfer of power.
According to the U.S. Department of Justice, starting at around 1 p.m., more than 2,000 rioters entered the Capitol building. They broke glass and climbed through windows to get in. 140 police officers were assaulted by protesters, including 60 Metropolitan Police and 80 U.S. Capitol Police.
The initial call for help when they breached the Capitol, there were kind of like a crescendo voice of level of concerns coming through the traffic and the radio, multiple breaches, being assaulted. So that's when we knew that things were getting out of hand, especially after Rudy Giuliani mentioned that, people were going to have trial by combat.
For hours, Capitol Police were the only line of defense against the mob. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser requested the help of the National Guard. But a report by the House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Reform found that then U.S. Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy waited until after 5 p.m. to approve this request. Gonell says those hours spent trying to hold back the mob were worse than any combat he faced as a soldier in Iraq.
All you could hear is the roaring crowd beating the police officers already on the ground. They're charging towards the Capitol. They're assaulting the police officer. And then immediately as I get down from the inaugural stage to the plaza, then I immediately get assaulted, not by one, but by multiple rioters that on the southwest corner of the Capitol Plaza on the west front. They push me, shove me, kick me, punch me, jab me with the American flag still attached to a flagpole, bruising my thighs and my stomach.
Gonell and his officers were desperate to hold the police line and keep rioters away from members of Congress, but the horde eventually broke through.
At one point, I was being crushed like they did to Officer Hodges between the doors, and you could hear him screaming. He's the officer who is perched between the door frame, the mob, and the police officer, and he screams very loud. I was right next to him. I'm getting crushed myself. Then somebody also was trying to pull me to a crowd later on, like 2 hours later. But the mere fact that they trying to pull me into a crowd, that was scary enough because I already had seen what they did to Hodges. I already seen what they did to Officer Fagnon.
Officer Michael Fagnon is now retired from his injuries. He was pulled by the neck into the mob by a rioter and then tased with a stun gun by another. He lost consciousness, suffered burns, traumatic brain injuries, and had a heart attack. Gonell still struggles with guilt to this day because Fagnon had swapped in for him just moments before so he could use the bathroom. When he returned a few minutes later, his fellow officer had succumbed to the mob. Gonell also sustained serious injuries that day, which required surgery to both his hands, one foot, and his shoulder. But perhaps the worst wound he suffered was to his psyche.
My PTSD from the military was aggravated and reactivated on January 6th again. So it's compounded one on top of the other. And then you had the moral injury where I did my job. I did what I was supposed to. I kept my oath. And even the people who I defended and protected that day, especially from the Republican side, they say that nothing happened, or these are patriots, these are political prisoners, these are hostages.
Gonell is referring to the news reports that came out in the days after the event. He was shocked to hear some congressmen, those who he had risked his life for, push a narrative that the protest was mostly a peaceful event.
When people say nothing happened to who? And why did nothing happen to them? Because the only reason why nothing happened to those elected officials is because the action of people like myself and my colleagues who defended them and prevent them from being harmed. Because all those people in the mob, they didn't care whether you were Republican, a Democrat, or independent. All they cared was stopping the procedure, and they wanted blood. And that's why they were hunting them down room by room.
Gonell is currently being treated for PTSD and says he's doing much better now. But the injuries he sustained that day, both physical and mental, ultimately took a toll. He had to retire from the force just shy of his long-sought promotion to lieutenant. As an immigrant from the Dominican Republic and a naturalized U.S. citizen, he's always been proud of serving his country. He was a soldier in the U.S. Army and then spent 17 years with the Capitol Police. After giving up so much, he can't help but feel sad about how some political leaders continue to downplay the events of January 6th.
Especially recently with the new speaker, Mike Johnson, selectively cherry-picking some of the footages that he had released. But what he has not released is the footages of him and his colleagues running for their lives, being evacuated with the help of the police to the safe area. To me, that is disingenuous of them to cherry pick certain things and not show the whole fighting. Everything that we did, they are desecrating for political purpose.
He hopes that all Americans on either side of the aisle will read the full account of his experience in his book, American Shield, The Immigrant Sergeant Who Defended Democracy, co-authored by Susan Shapiro. You can find out more about the events of January 6, 2021 by visiting our website at viewpointsradio.org, where you'll also learn more about our guest, Sergeant Aquillino Gonell, as well as all of our past guests. The book American Shield is available now online and at select bookstores. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Instagram, X, and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Our studio engineer is Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Coming up next week.
The birds survived, and of course birds are living dinosaurs.
The larger picture of why dinosaurs are no longer around today. Then,
I had to really put her back in line and say, you're still a teenager, go out with your friends, you're going to college, this is not your burden, let's process this. You've had a loss too, let's talk about this.
Finding a way back after loss. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.
Trying to grab all the groceries in one trip? Oof, not how you would have done that. You know sometimes less is more. Like when you drive less and save with the USAA annual mileage discount. USAA. Get a quote today.